want to welcome everyone to today or tonight, depending on your time zone, Meet the Scholar session. I'm Ha Huang. I'm a professor of management at STR Business School. I'm also STR Executive Committee member, along with other participants tonight who have been involved in providing some of what I hope will be a really interesting conversation. And tonight, sorry, it's 9 p.m. here, so I'm going to say tonight, we have a distinguished scholar, Joanne Oxley. And Joanne is McCutcheon Professor in International Business, a professor of strategic management at the Rotman School. I and Shelby Guy, who's great help, want to just give you a brief background to Joanne before we turn it over to her. Some career highlights. Now, I just want to make sure that the career highlights emphasize your achievements to date, because obviously you're still going strong. First of all, Joanne got her PhD at UC Berkeley in 1990 and graduated in 1995. Her dissertation advisor was the late Oliver Williamson. You know, I think you'll probably have a few words to say about his contribution and your experience with him. After graduating with your PhD, you joined the Ross School of Business as an assistant professor. And in 2004, you went to the Rotman School, where you are to present, and actually now some vice dean or a member of the administration. So obviously rose through the ranks. Your list of publications is very long, top tier journals, of course. But I just want to highlight 2 articles that I think have had a great deal of impact. The first one is with David Mowry and Brian Silverman, which was published in 1995, Strategic Alliances and Interfirm Knowledge Transfer, which has over 4,500 Google citations and was very recently the winner of the SMJ Best Paper Prize. So that I think really reflects the impact that article has had. And I also really would like to hear a little bit more also about the work that you did during your PhD, which I believe produced the second article, which is also highly cited, sole authored, I should mention, Appropriability Hazards in Governance and Strategic Alliances, a Transaction Cost Approach. Now, in addition to these publications, I also want to highlight that you have had a number of really productive collaborations with then doctoral students and young scholars, including Rochelle Sampson, Fabrice Lumino, Elena Colchina, and Juan Alcacer. So I think that speaks to, well, maybe we can talk about your collaborative strategy later on. And finally, given the health and economic crisis that we're finding ourselves in, I should also mention that you're the special issue co-editor and Strategy Sciences journal on international strategy in an era of global flux. So I know that there are probably some international business scholars listening today, and I think that if you can reflect on some of the takeaways from your own research in international business and what's emerged from the special issue, that would be wonderful as well. Now, the final detail that I just wanted to add about Joanne, I believe that's where I got cut off, is that you're married to a professional juggler with 2 wonderful children. So that's it for the career highlights. Given that you dropped out of school to become an engineering apprentice, I think that's a good opportunity to turn it over to you, Joanne, to share a little bit about how you got into academia and of course, your experiences at Berkeley, working with Oliver Williamson, and also with your co-authors that I mentioned earlier, David Mowry and Brian Silverman. To start.
Sure. Thank you, Ha. And first of all, I should just say thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this. It's such a pleasure to be here. I said to somebody, I feel like I'm going on like This Is Your Life or something, you know. It's fun to have a chance to chat, and it's also fun to see faces and names that it's just really nice to see everybody, and I appreciate the intro. We actually I think we all lost you actually before you got onto the fun facts, so maybe I should say that the first one was I did indeed leave high school when I was 15, and I went to be an engineering apprentice, which is not your typical route probably into academia. I grew up in Northern England, as you may know, and I was not a great fan of high school. Academically, it was fine and dandy. Socially, not my favorite place. So when by kind of a strange, convoluted set of events, somebody suggested that maybe I should go and talk to an engineering firm. I was just taking my O-levels at that time, so the exams that you take at kind of 15, 16. Somebody said I didn't know what I wanted to pursue. I liked science. I didn't want to work in a lab. I wasn't sure what A-levels to take. And actually it was my dad said, why don't you go and have a couple of informational interviews with engineering firms and you know, see if that's a career that kind of appeals to you, not thinking at all that it would prompt me to immediately leave school, become this engineering apprentice. I was actually the first female apprentice at a tractor company, tractor manufacturing company. So it was me and 25, 16-year-old boys doing this kind of technical apprenticeship. So I was on the shop floor. I was doing all of the things that you can imagine goes into tractor manufacturing. And then I was going to school at night, and I have an ordinary national certificate in engineering, which is kind of the equivalent of an A-level in engineering, kind of. I took A-level maths on the side, and then the company actually sponsored me to go to, and that's how I wound up at Trent Polytechnic, which is not, it's not Oxford. Let's just say that. It's not Oxford, but it was serendipitously, I happened upon into a really, this is kind of in the story of my life. This is like completely unplanned, serendipitously, I find myself in these kind of fantastic situations. And this was one of them because I turned up at Trent Polytechnic, and it just happened that they were starting a new program, a double honors degree in engineering and business studies, as it was called then. There were only 15 of us in this program, me and 14 guys, you know, this is another story. And so we had, you know, like we were just together, this kind of cohort of 15 students through 5 years of engineering and business studies education, and it was a co-op degree, so I would go back to the tractor company along the way. And I had what I think I couldn't have asked for a better undergrad educational experience. And you know, my experience as an engineering apprentice was also, you know, like transformative. It had highs, it had lows, but just that combination of kind of practical experience at the same time as combining it with academia was fantastic. So I had, as I say, I feel like I had a really great kind of undergrad experience. Following from that, so when I graduated from Trent Poly, I wanted to stay in Nottingham, which is where it was. I did not want to go back to the tractor manufacturers. So I actually went and I got a job at Raleigh Bicycle Company that was in Nottingham. And I was actually a production engineer, or manufacturing engineer, as they're called now. And it turned out, while I loved being a trainee engineer, I loved studying engineering as a discipline, turned out I really didn't like working as an engineer. And so after a couple of years, I was wondering, what the heck am I going to do now? I've been an engineer since I was, you know, like 16. Now I'm kind of figuring out I don't want to do this. What am I going to do now? And I just happened to see another serendipity thing. I was walking down the corridor one day, saw this poster advertising a traveling scholarship, a Nottingham Roosevelt Memorial Traveling Scholarship. And it basically was something where they would give you money, send you off to the States for 4 months to pursue some interest related to your work and no other obligations. So I applied, I got one, I went off to the States. This is a long, convoluted story, but it's kind of a long, convoluted story how I got into academia. I traveled around the States, I met my husband there, decided that, you know what, I want to change careers anyway, so why don't I just move to the States? I moved to the States. Then it's like, now what do I do? It's like, well, we were living in Berkeley, maybe I will do my MBA because, you know, if I'm going to change countries and change careers, how do I do that? I'll go to grad school. Applied to Berkeley, got into Berkeley, had a great experience as an MBA student. Coming towards the end of that, it really reignited my love of academia, which I had loved as an undergrad. I loved the studying. So I decided, oh, maybe I'll do a PhD. Where shall I do a PhD? Well, I'm at Berkeley. I'll go to Berkeley. Applied to Berkeley and ended up in the PhD program. So I feel like at each of these stages, it was very unplanned on my part, lots of serendipity involved, but really, once I got into the PhD program, it's my home, like the university kind of is my home. And I just knew really as soon as I got back into the MBA, as soon as I got into the MBA program, it's like, this is where I'm meant to be, and so that's how I ended up doing what I'm doing. Yeah.
Did you, in Berkeley as an MBA student, did you know who you were going to work with when you joined the PhD program, or did you get to know the professors and their research? And how did that process work out so that you ended up working, your advisor was Oliver Williamson, and what stage was he in his career, and what role did he play in your intellectual development? Yeah,
so let me answer that in two parts. I'll get to Williamson in a moment, but I think that so I decided that I wanted to pursue a PhD before I really decided what I wanted to pursue a PhD in, to be perfectly honest. So after my first year in the MBA program, I'd actually taken more finance courses than anything else at that point. And so I thought maybe I'll do a PhD in finance. And then I started thinking about it and thinking, oh, that means I actually have to teach finance and research in finance. Maybe I don't want to do that. And so I had really enjoyed the courses that I'd taken, actually with David Vogel, who's a business and public policy. They had a business and public policy group. And so the kind of the economics and the business and public policy was what I was really interested in. And so in my second year of the MBA program, I actually took a PhD seminar with in the BPP program. I don't think I did very well I don't think I was a great PhD student as an MBA student. You can just imagine if one of your MBA students kind of drops into a PhD class, they probably I was probably continually derailing the conversation is my guess. But it was sufficient to really, persuade me that this is what I wanted to do. And I was super lucky to have really strong mentors through that transition. So the people who really kind of got me into the PhD program one of them was David Vogel. I actually got my worst grade as an MBA student from David Vogel. And so I thought, when I was thinking about taking a PhD, I thought, okay, I'm going to ask David, because if he thinks I shouldn't, I know he'll tell me. And so he was very encouraging at the get-go. Janet Yellen was at Berkeley while I was there, and I'd taken a couple of classes with Janet as an MBA student. And I also kind of talked to her about it, and she was super kind of encouraging and very strong about what she thought I should do as a PhD student. So that was really, really good. And then Oliver Williamson, I didn't know at all as an MBA student. He didn't teach MBAs. My only contact with him actually as an MBA student was I had entered into, they had a speaking competition for MBA students where you had to do a speech based on a public policy issue. And that year it was when the whole Japan scare was on. So I think our subject was the takeover of the US by Japanese business, and I didn't win, but I did pretty well in that contest. I got into the final, and Williamson was actually one of the judges. So he was also kind of encouraging, but I didn't really know him very well. And it was only when I got into the PhD program and Oliver Williamson was actually just arrived in the PhD program, I think, arrived at Berkeley only about the year before. all of the first year PhD students in the business and public policy group, as well as some of the econ students like Peter Klein, Nick Agiris were in that class too. We all took Williamson's class, and I was listening to the previous Meet the Scholar with Joe Mahoney just before, and he was saying about how when he read Markets and Hierarchies, it really kind of spoke to him, and it really made sense to him and helped him to make sense of the world in many ways. And that's kind of how I felt about the transaction cost kind of agenda. And what was amazing about that class, it was actually right about the time when Oliver was writing the Economic Institutions of Capitalism, and he essentially kind of like took us through transaction cost economics, kind of building it from the ground up in that class. So we read all of the, you know, the pieces around the behavioral underpinnings and that, and so it was a fantastic, just a fantastic learning experience. And it really did, I think that's what created kind of that cohort of students who then, you know, who we went on to work with Williamson as in our dissertation work, and you know, it really created such a community of scholars around those ideas that honestly, I think that was also part of what was so appealing to me. It was the ideas themselves, but it was also this feeling of being, you know, part of an intellectual community with a mission. You know, we were on a mission, and there was something super motivating about that. Sorry, go ahead.
I think your contribution was to marry the theory with empirics. So I wondered if you could talk a little bit about your dissertation research and how you came to your topic. Yep. Maybe any advice that you have along the way.
Yeah. So what I should also say about, you know, in terms of this serendipity thing, so prior to coming to Berkeley, Williamson hadn't worked with that many students, right? If you look prior to Berkeley, who it was who we had worked with directly, it was really like Scott Maston and maybe one or two others, but really that was not his thing. You know, he was on his own mission. I think he just wasn't that open to working with students when he was at Penn or when he was at Yale, etc. And when he came to Berkeley, it was a very distinct decision on his part that he felt like, I think it was in some ways really instrumental. He felt like the theory and his body of work had reached a sufficient stage of maturity that it was now time to promulgate it, you know, and it was like, okay, I need students to kind of go out there and change the world, you know, and carry it on. And I do think there was a little bit of instrumentalism on his part in that. Now, once he had made that decision, he was incredibly committed to his students and you know, like really super generous with his time and his attention, and a really you know, a very particular but a really phenomenal advisor. And so I think that what happened was, as I was kind of going into the dissertation phase, I had the devil's own time kind of coming up with a viable topic. I actually started a dissertation that was looking at the impact of different types of trade policy on organization. I knew I wanted to do something in international, and I was pretty interested in kind of trade policy. I'd done trade as one of my fields I'd done international as one of the fields in the econ masters that I did along the way. So that's what I thought I was going to do. And I worked on that thing. And I even did defended a proposal based on this link between trade protection and organization. And so I had kind of to be honest, kind of a lame theoretical framework for thinking about that, but I could never marry it with data. I just never managed to kind of find any data. And, you know, you say that one of my approaches was empirical. Williamson was really, he encouraged everybody to be empirical. I don't think he was that interested in somebody else working on refining the theory. What he really thought was missing was the empirical base. So if you were working with Williamson, he was always encouraging you to, you know, to do these empirical studies. He wasn't that interested in formalism. At one point, I remember I wrote what I thought was a very elegant model, you know, like formalizing part of TCE, and he just basically ripped it up in front of my eyes, I think. So I really nearly quit. I mean, I was long in the PhD program, and having I was in the throes of this like failed dissertation, I decided I was going to quit the program. And in fact, I wrote to Williamson when he used to go off to his cottage for summers. And I wrote to him at his cottage in Wisconsin and said, you know, basically, all is lost, I program, you know, sorry and thank you. And the next thing I know, I get a phone call from him, and almost verbatim, his you know, like his words were, "Joanne, you can't leave the program. There's too much work to be done." He's like, "Hybrids, think hybrids." Because that happened to be something that he was just kind of interested in at the time. And so I didn't leave, and I happened to be, and that was around, so I should back up a second. The other super important person to me in the PhD program, and one who for sure I wouldn't be here without, was David Mowry, right? So he was the other, I would say, the other kind of really, really incredibly important underpinning for me. And during this whole time when I was going through this existential crisis and, you know, not making any progress and about to fall out, to leave the program, it wasn't Williamson that I was going to bug in the office, you know, every week or every couple of weeks. It was David Mowry. David Mowry basically made me come to his office every 2 weeks. And we had a meeting, and even if it was just basically me just sitting there going, I haven't done anything, you know, he still made me go and sit with him. And it was just around about that time when the CADI Alliance data kind of fell in his lap, and he kind of threw it into my lap. And it was just one of those things where, I won't say it all just came together in a flash, but it was, again, serendipity. It's like, I think I had done enough of the preparatory work that I could see the opportunity. You know, I may not have seen that opportunity had it happened a year earlier. But honestly, I think it was essentially a year between me, you know, dropping out of the program and me being on the job market. So once it kind of started coming together, it actually came together really fast, but oh boy, it was a long time coming.
Wow, serendipity, but the prepared mind. I think you're making that point very clear. So I guess with the experience that you had at Berkeley, are there any other, you know, just reflecting on that, the mentorship that you got, what kind of mentorship do you provide now, and how do you pay it forward, I guess is the.
So, yeah, this is an issue that's very near and dear to my heart. I might even tear up as I'm saying this, because I think mentorship is central, right? When I look back at kind of how did I get through this, you know, me being, I don't want to say ditzy, but certainly kind of unfocused along the way. How did I still manage to somehow muddle my way through? It really comes down to having had incredible mentors at every stage of the way. At every single step of the way, I can look back and I can point to, if it had not been for the mentorship of, you know, like David Vogel, Janet Yellen, Oliver Williamson, David Mowry, Bronwyn Hall. Then when I got to Michigan, there was Francine LaFontaine, there was Will Mitchell, there was Bernie Young. When I got Anita McGann, you know, played incredibly important roles at different stages of my career. And I know I'm missing a whole bunch too, but really like fantastically important in terms of just support and advice and role models and all the rest of it. And so that's also been, you know, on the other side of it, that's also been the thing that I probably get the most, yeah, see, I am. It's probably the thing that I get the most satisfaction out of has been working with junior scholars, PhD students, junior scholars, just junior colleagues, you know, like if somebody calls me up and says, Joanne, I have this issue I want to talk about, and you know, we'll chat, and then they'll go, oh, I'm really sorry I took your time, you know, I know you're really busy. And I'm like, are you kidding? This is like the best thing that happened to me all month. Just kind of that chance to, you know, like kind of share and feel like you're seeing people move along, you know. So I think that sometimes I empathize too much with students who are going through difficulties, because I was there, you know. I proselytize about, you know, going to counseling because that's what it took to get me kind of back in along the way. But I get huge satisfaction out of it, and I also think, you know, for junior scholars, so mentorship is a tricky thing, right? I think if you're too instrumental in terms of going out and searching for a mentor, you know, if you think, oh, I should like work with that person because they'll be a great, you know, they're really important and they'll be a great mentor, and people see through that right away, and it can be really counterproductive. But at the same time, you have to be really open to mentorship. I think that is the key, right? It's like with all of those different mentoring relationships, they started with, you know, somebody who, for whatever reason, saw something and reached out to engage with me, and I was really open to it. I was like so ready to engage back. And because in some ways there's got to be something in it for the mentor and the mentee, right? And so, and similarly, when I think of the people who I've remained closest to, the junior colleagues who I've remained closest to over the years, it's those with whom there's this sense of a real kind of reciprocation in the relationship, and that, as I say, I mean, I genuinely feel that many times I leave these conversations feeling so happy and so enriched, and like I've had this, you know, like really energizing conversation, whether it be on, you know, core intellectual issues, or whether it just be along how the heck do I kind of, you know, juggle work and life, or, you know, I'm thinking about not having kids yet because of this, what do you think? Or, you know, these big life questions are these really deep intellectual questions, and the best kind of mentor-mentee relationships are when it runs the gamut, you know.
So if you do start new projects, is there a spider sense that gets you thinking, oh, this sounds really interesting, or is it part of sort of an agenda that you've had coming in, and so the ideas are just kind of fitting into that agenda? Yeah. How open are you to the serendipity versus maybe a program that you're I'm sure it probably just depends at what stage of the career you're at, right?
Yeah. But so this is, this is serendipity. So one of the things which is really true about me, and that you can probably see by looking at my Vita, is I'm horrible at starting projects. I am not somebody who sits there with kind of like a million ideas all just ready to tee up, and I have like a million projects going at once. It's always been really hard for me starting projects. So right back to my dissertation, right? It was the hardest thing, just kind of getting over. I'm a real second guesser. So it's not that I don't have ideas, it's just that I'll have an idea and I immediately squash it, right? So I'm a terrible starter of projects. But I do have I do have an agenda, right? So what's tended to happen a lot of times is that I almost always co-author, right? I haven't really solo authored anything since my dissertation. I'm definitely a fan of co-authoring. I don't think I have my attempts at doing solo papers, and I have had attempts, have never really gone, and I think it's something missing in my psychology. But where I've had really successful, I think, co-authorships is when some of my favorite projects, in fact, that I've worked on, some of them I've initiated, right? I'm not going to say that I'm always the free writer. Some I've initiated and brought somebody else on to work on it. But sometimes some of my favorite projects have been ones where somebody had already started a paper, or maybe it was something that was kind of hanging over from their dissertation or something. They really didn't know what to do with it. It kind of wasn't working. It wasn't really going anywhere. And we would have a conversation, and I would just kind of like go, yeah, but you could do like this. And it's like, take the paper that was here, and if you do this, it would be so cool. And so it's their data, you know, it's like I'm really free writing in that sense. But there's something about just seeing that kernel of it, and then we start working on it. And where I will give myself some credit is I'm a really good finisher. I'm not a good starter, but I'm a good finisher. And so, you know, if we get that kind of serendipity where it really was their project to be with. So if you look at my work with Chris O'Machin, that's true. If you look at my work with Elena Colcina, it's true. If you look at my work with Fabrice, it was true. It's true. I have an odd paper with Garup Deshpande that was also true. So a bunch of them are ones where, you know, Tetsuo Wada. So I have a lot of these where it's somebody else's data to begin with, and in some ways the nub of the paper was already in existence. But you know, the difference between that nub of the paper at the beginning and then what we finished up with, I think every one of them would agree with me that it took it quite a long way. You know, it wasn't just a refining and polishing. It really was a step change. But I think that's really idiosyncratic about me. I don't actually know anybody else who's quite as bad at me at starting projects. But that's kind of how it goes. But when they work, it's because it dovetails so well with my agenda, right? And it's because I have this very particular kind of view of the world and this kind of apparatus that I kind of work out of. That's why I see what I see in these papers that kind of pre-exist.
Well, if I can turn a little bit to a practical element, which is that you said that you're a great finisher. Are there any tips or tricks that you pass along to maybe others who aren't so great at finishing projects to help them, you know, get over the hump and be successful in finishing? So, or maybe things that you've learned from your diverse co-authors that you take with you now.
Yeah. So I think it's actually one of the things that I think is a huge advantage in co-authoring, and one of the reasons why sometimes I choose who I want to co-author with before we decide what we're going to co-author on. And that is partly because I think that a really good co-authoring relationship you have complementarities in terms of skill sets, right? But you also have some kind of complementarities from a kind of temperament perspective. And then just naturally, what I often find with joint projects is that there's always stages along the way where you lose hope, right? There's always stages along the way where you go, this is just not going to work. And what I find is that with co-authors, you tend to be on this like reverse sine wave cycle, you know, right? So just when you're at the lowest, your co-author comes along and goes, no, but we could do X, right? And similarly, if my co-author's in the doldrums, I'll often find that I'm, you know, being able to not just be a cheerleader, but you actually kind of come up with some idea or whatever. And so I think that is the beauty of a productive co-authorship, is that you complement each other, not just from a skill set point of view, but somehow temperamentally, so that you're able to actually be encouraging of each other rather than just getting into some death spiral together, you know. So that's one thing. I think co-authorships are really important in that respect, the right co-authors. I think the other thing is that I think one of the, you know, when it comes to finishing, I think once you've submitted a paper and you have an R&R, I think, don't submit your papers too early. I know people who like to like just throw it at the walls. I don't want to send a paper out until I won't say I'm satisfied with it, but I'm happy on some, I feel like it's ready. And so I will say that most of my papers, maybe this is, I haven't had a lot of rejections along the way. I mean, I think probably fewer than normal because of that. I don't write that many papers and I tend to hold on to them maybe a little too long sometimes. But once you get that R&R, first I think you should, give it a quick read and throw it in a drawer for a week, right? Because the first reaction is always, they're so wrong. And in fact, I remember one of the times with one of the papers that I wrote with Chris, a Machen, I got the reviews back and I was on my way to class or something. So I scanned the letter. I thought, it's been rejected. So I threw it in the drawer. I didn't look at it for like another 2 weeks because it was really a busy time. It was like the end of semester or something. I opened it up and it's like, oh, wait a minute, it's actually an R&R. It was like so negative, the tone, that I just assumed it was a rejection. And so, but then by that time, I'd processed all that hate. And so then you really, I think really taking seriously those reviews, and even if you disagree with it, even if you think they're just wrong, at the very minimum, it means that you did not communicate effectively, right? So you should never dismiss any comment that a reviewer makes, because as I say, they may not be correct, but if they're not correct, chances are it's because you miscommunicated, not because they're stupid, right? So I think that is probably why I think I'm a good finisher, is I think I can pretty much, I can think of one, I think I only have one exception to this. I think pretty much through my career, when I've gotten an R&R, I've parlayed it into a publication, even if it was a very long, it was, posed as a very long shot R&R. And that is because I think I like the problem solving aspect of working through revisions. And a lot of people hate that stage, right? Because they're sick of the project already. For some reason, it's a good fit for me. And I enjoy actually working through those problems and communicating, the craft of it.
Right, that's wonderful. I guess there's that emotional side, in that having that great co-authors helps ride out some of that emotional roller coaster. Now, we've talked a little bit about your experiences in publication and collaboration, and now you're kind of in a different stage of your career, right? You're an administrator for a few years, if I'm not correct. And what's it like, kind of, maybe there are some of us who are also doing administrative work. Are you able to maintain a foot in the research, or how are you imagining getting back into it, and et cetera, et cetera?
So I'll admit that's been, I knew it was going to be hard, and it has been hard. I resisted doing any kind of major administrative role for the longest time. In part because I knew that I would have a hard time setting boundaries and really, maintaining productivity. I'm not a high productivity researcher to begin with, and so I really did resist it a long time. But I also do have my own personal ethos is that we are all incredibly privileged to have the positions that we do as academics. And I think that everybody who can and has the capability should take on at least one significant administrative role over the course of their career, for the, basically to give to help to run the school at some point. Because if the profs don't run the school, then the true administrators will, and then we'll all be worse off. So I think it's important that faculty do step up and take up a big role at some point. And so I decided that, I was the associate dean and then vice dean faculty. So, it's the faculty dean role, it's a pretty big role. I did that for 4 years. I should have been on sabbatical as we speak. I thought I was going to be done and that I was going to be back getting my research back up and running. But then, few things happened, COVID partly, but also our dean decamped relatively quickly because he's now the head of the Bank of Canada. And that's not the kind of move that you get a lot of warning about. So really just within a few weeks at the end of June, he left. Another of the kind of the senior vice dean, if you like, became interim dean. And so I've agreed to take on his vice dean role for 1 year. So now I'm vice dean of research, strategy, and resources, whatever that means. So I'm doing this for 1 more year, and then I'll be on leave, with the hope that I'll get things back and running. Because for a while, just kind of momentum can carry you with your research through an admin role. And I think somebody who was a better pipeline manager than me could probably do a better job. Joel Baum did the faculty role before me, and he stayed amazingly productive through it. So I know it's not impossible. I just knew that it would be impossible for me. And so, as I say, momentum took me for a while because I like working on the ends of papers, but I haven't started anything new really, honestly, since I took the big admin role. So I guess this is I'm a cautionary tale. Don't do it until you can. Don't do it until you can kind of handle the hit in productivity. Either because you're so productive that you can do that and still carry on, or because, like me, you're at a point where you feel like, okay, I feel like it's important to do this for the school.
Right, and as a female professor, and in this role, where you make decisions and policies that affect a lot of, your colleagues, do you have a certain perspective that you took into this, or did you discover that you had a certain perspective based on your own experience
yeah, so I was actually really lucky coming into this role that the dean and Ken Courts, who's now our interim dean, were really kind of on a mission to increase really kind of the transparency and the equity around policies related to the faculty and other things in the school. And so that was also part of what appealed to me, to be honest, to be in the role. And so I do think that, you can't make, universities are very inert institutions. But on the margin, I've always been a kind of a work it from the inside kind of feminist, and I am a feminist, but I'm a work it from the inside feminist rather than a blow up the bridges kind of person. And so there is an opportunity, I think, in this kind of role to have on the margin to have some effect on that. So we have made some progress on gender, the gender distribution in the faculty. I have made some progress on family-friendly and female-friendly policies, like the kind of the soft policies. We have I think collectively done a really good job of increasing the transparency around a variety of different policies, because I think a lot of times where inequities come in a university setting is that you're either in the know or you're not in the know. And a lot of there's often a lot of special deals in universities. And so one of our mantras has been, no more special deals, which isn't the same as saying that you treat everybody the same, but rather that everybody kind of understands the basis on which these decisions are made. And everybody has equal access to information about, like buyout policies or these kind of things, because there were some ridiculous things where we did have a policy, but it was never advertised. And so some people knew about it and took advantage of it all the time, and other people just didn't even know about it. And those are the kinds of things that I think on the margin have a big impact on kind of equity and inclusiveness in the academy. And so that's definitely been, if I've had a passion as an administrator, it's pretty hard to associate passion with administration, I will say. But to the extent that I have had one, it has been that. And we already knew that we needed to expand that lens beyond gender to other kind of racialized and, as we call it in Canada, equity-seeking groups. And to be honest, we started it with gender, not because it's, first among those, but rather because A, it's 50% of the population, so you're dealing with a big pool, and B, it's something that is relatively easy to track and to identify and all the rest of it. As you expand beyond that category into, as I say, other equity-seeking groups, we have real problems around data availability, and there's a lot, it becomes a lot more complicated. So we're, as everybody else is, we are grappling with it now, both because this is a moment, and I think it's, it's a wave that we need to ride, not just because, for PR, but because there's an energy that we want to capture right now. But it's also, for me at least, a very natural progression of some of the policies that we'd put in place and some of the things that we've been thinking of around gender are, a lot of those practices were really about inclusiveness no matter what, right? But I think that we're trying to be a little bit more targeted right now, particularly we have some groups that are just criminally underrepresented within our faculty, and so that's something that but there's no quick fixes. So the things that we're putting in place right now probably won't pay off for 5-10 years down the line in terms of real outputs, but that's, yeah. So if there's one thing that I want to kind of achieve in this 1 year that I have in this particular role, that's what I just basically to hold people's what's the expression? Just keep people on it, like and keep moving forward, albeit slowly.
Well, I can hear the passion, so that's wonderful. I have one last question, and then I think what we're going to do is then turn it over to first. We're going to ask everybody to take a screenshot, but maybe one quick question for you is, you mentioned, and this is just bringing us up to date now, with your international business background, one of the participants asked the question, I want to send it over to you. What has, this crisis that we're going through now, what has it raised for you in terms of, here are some core IB concepts that's just being reinforced, or here's work that we need to do because in fact it's highlighting areas that we don't know much about. And I was just wondering if you have any thoughts, and maybe building on your special issue that you did last year.
I mean, I think there are so many issues that have really kind of come into focus with the current crisis. And I mean, everything from just to kind of keep going on the inequality thing. I mean, it is so sharply brought into focus the different dimensions of inequality that exist, not only just in North America, but in other places too. From an international business point of view, I think one of the things that it has just, again, really brought into focus is the fragility that can exist in international supply chains, and the kinds of, for me, one of the things that I think is really, I've always thought in some ways of international business as being an arena that really just, it's not that things are different in kind when you look internationally necessarily, but they bring certain issues into very sharp focus, right? And they really give you a way to kind of identify and really really examine in more depth a particular set of issues. So, one of the things that I've been quite increasingly interested in recent years is the the informal contracting, relation contracting, however you want to define that, and kind of these informal and other supports for cooperation, like outside of kind of formal governance structures. And I think that one of the things that's clearly true within the international context is, just how it's very difficult to rely on legal institutions, and so these it brings into, it again brings into sharp focus what are the supports and the limits of extra legal, if you like, contract enforcement, etc. And I think that sometimes we can get all kumbaya about, you know, trust in relationships, in commercial relationships, and I think something like this really, you know, lets you know that yeah, we trust each other and everything's really nice until it all hits the fan, and then it all just crumbles, right? And so I think that one of it has highlighted for sure how interdependent individuals and economies are across the globe at this point. It has highlighted the importance of robust and kind of stable supply chain relationships and cooperative relationships. And it also has brought into very sharp focus the limits of thereof. And I don't even begin to, I wouldn't even begin to suggest what I think are the specific research questions that should be coming out of that. But I think that these are big issues, even just within the narrow world that I live in, right? I mean, I don't want to suggest that this is the biggest set of issues that come out of the current crisis, but obviously it's the set of issues that is closest to the kind of work that I do.
Okay.
What I know we're going to get, and what I'm not looking forward to, is the 10 to the power of n of papers on any random subject you can think of that is going to use the COVID shock as their instrument. It's going to happen. I am not looking forward to it. I'm sure there'll be a few that are phenomenal. And then there'll be a whole ton more that it's like, yeah, great instrument, but why the heck do we care about your question? Right? So, yeah. So that's my little rant on that.
Yeah, important warning for sure. Well, I think we're at a good point now where I think if the participants who can put on their camera, we're going to do a quick screenshot. Thank you so much. A quick screenshot so we can continue to publicize the series, Meet the Scholar series, and hopefully get others to join future.
How about I count to 3, and then everyone can smile at the camera. All right, so 1, 2, 3, cheese. Okay, I think we're good.
Okay, thank you. Now I think that since I've had a chance to ask questions, I'm going to turn it over to the participants, and also Asim has kindly also agreed to sort of moderate the Q&A part of this. So at this point, I really encourage anyone there to pose a question to Joanne.
Thank you, Ha, for the...
Oh, my pleasure.
Thanks, Ha. As Ha said, you know, please feel free to post questions in the chat. And while you're thinking about what you want to ask, let me ask a question and use my prerogative to do that. So Joanne, you know, I was just thinking, it was just as I was listening to you talk, and I was thinking about the fact that, you know, this is kind of the 10-year anniversary of the SRI piece, the sort of opinion piece that you and the SRI community wrote in Strategic Org, right? Which, you know, of course, you know, has been in many ways, for me, coming out as a PhD student at that sort of point was kind of a big deal. And I think for many people it was. So, you know, in the decade that's gone by, you know, how do you think, you know, how do you see the sort of evolution of those ideas? You think we've made progress? What are some things we maybe haven't made progress on?
I actually think we've made a huge amount of progress. So for those who perhaps don't know, so like the strategy research initiative that a bunch of us, Mike Ryle was really the initial impetus, but there were a bunch of us got together with, and it was the idea for it was a little bit of a generational project, if you like. We're all kind of around the same kind of generation, academically speaking. And it did come out of some dissatisfaction with kind of the state of the field, very grandiose, but also with some of the, you know, kind of the editorial policies at the journals and stuff. And so in that piece, you know, it really was in some ways this call to action for us to think more carefully about things on the theoretical side, to think more carefully about things on the empirical side and around identification. We weren't the only ones who were talking about it, obviously, at the time. There were a few really good essays on similar subjects at the time. And we also, of course, did the PhD reader and the PhD workshops at that time, which is also, you know, was probably that was my passion project within the SRA. And what's interesting is that in the 10 years from that, at the time it created some anger, I will say. There was some pushback from people of two varieties. And I think, you know, with some justification. One kind of critique was, this is kind of, you know, this is nothing very new, and there's a bunch of us been saying these things, and you guys are, like, you know, coming in like you're the only ones who understand this, and in fact a lot of us understand this. And I think that was a legitimate critique. I think it was worth saying in the form that we said it, but still, you know, I think we were probably a little overreaching in our claim for novelty. So there was that critique, and then there was the other critique, which I think is actually was a little bit more kind of knee-jerk, which is, yeah, this is all very well, but if you want to ask interesting questions, you know, you have to kind of just wave your hands a little bit when it comes to the rigor of the theory or the rigor of the empirics, that, you know, if we focus too much on empirics, that we're just going to stop asking interesting questions. And I think that was, you know, that was just kind of not a very productive or fortunate critique. What I think has happened in the interim is that there was a little while where everybody was kind of obsessed about identification, and there were a lot of people acting like deers caught in headlights. You know, it's like, we don't really know how to do this, and strategy questions really are complicated. We're never going to find the perfect instrument, so we might as well all quit and go home, or we all have to start doing field experiments. So that field experiments has been one response to this, if you like, right? What I think has been, in some ways, the more, the healthier response, and what I see a heck of a lot more of now in strategy research, is that people are really grappling with issues of identification, and they're grappling with it both from a theoretical perspective, you know, like actually thinking about strategic choice rather than just thinking of strategy choice as serendipitous somehow. So I think that people are grappling with it when it comes to actually looking for explanations of phenomena. And I think that they're grappling with it in their empirical work a lot more. The bad version of this is where they just do business as usual, and then they do in an appendix some lame two-stage thing with a made-up instrument, and, you know, look, it still works. Okay, that's to me not the good version of it. But the good version of it is, okay, we recognize that this is an issue. We actually think clearly about where the potential problems are, and then you actually do a really good job of interrogating the data and doing, you know, like really simple. I'm a huge fan of descriptive statistics. You actually look, you know, if we think this matters, can we see people making choices based on this? You know, is it the case that things in hierarchies look different than things in markets? We would hope that they do, you know. And they do some of that, and then they do in some cases they get very creative and come up with a great instrument. In some cases, they're really not able to come up with a great instrument, so they do the best that they can. But again, you triangulate, right? You're never going to get it perfect. So you see a lot, I mean, huge advance in terms of the thoughtfulness of the approach over, 10 years ago, certainly over 15 years ago, when we were pretty much, you know, Ha mentioned Mary Oxley Silverman. We were oblivious to this stuff in the mid-90s. I mean, it's like terrible when it comes to identification issues, really, but, you know, And in the meantime, of course, a lot of the SRI founders are now in various editorial positions across. So we have infiltrated the journals in some sense, and so that's part of why you see a change in the journal policies.
Great. So I do have a question in chat, which is kind of related, I guess. So I'm going to let Yuping ask her question rather than trying to read it out to you. Yuping, do you want to just unmute and ask?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for the wonderful discussion. So I have a related question. I'm a PhD student in Colorado. So right now there are many new phenomena for us to explore, such as AI and machine learning. But there are also many traditional and classical studies. So I wonder if you have any suggestions for PhD students about how to choose between studying relatively new phenomena versus more classic studies, as well as how to theorize or find theoretical explanations for those new phenomena. Thank you.
Cool. You're asking a question of the person who just said she's terrible at coming up with research questions. So I'm probably the last person to be able to give any real insight there. But I do think that, and this is a little trite, but it's true. You know, we're in this for the long haul. And so in terms of choosing a dissertation topic, to my mind, there are two key ingredients that a dissertation has to have. Okay, maybe three, but really two from the point of view of this. One, it has to be doable, right? So when I say that it has to be doable, it has to be, I do think that choosing a phenomenon where you have a sense of how you could actually get data, etc. It has to be doable, but it also has to be interesting to you. And I think that is really key as well. I think that trying to choose, if you're trying to decide what dissertation to do based on how interested others will be in the topic, I think in some ways you're asking the wrong question. If you find a topic that is very interesting to you, and if you go into it with a curious mindset, both about the topic you're interested in, but also curious about the literature in which you're kind of living in, you will find a way to relate this topic that you are interested in to the debates that are going on in the literature. Because I do think that, to your point, you need to, it's not about, is it the newest, sexiest topic versus the tried and true. It really is about, can you connect what you're interested in learning about to some of these active and interesting debates that are currently going on in your field, right? And I think if you find a topic that you are genuinely interested in, a phenomenon or a theoretical question, some people start with a theoretical question as the nub of their project. Some people start off with, this phenomenon or this just weird thing that they've seen out there. I think if you find one of those that you are genuinely interested in, and you are curious and really read with a curious mind around, you will find a way to make your topic interesting to others. But if you're not interested in your topic, nobody else will be interested in your topic.
Right, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And since we are talking about PhD students, and I see an upvote for Zhao's question about, so let's think about PhD students on the other side of that dissertation thing, coming close to graduation, worrying about what the pandemic means for short-term and long-term job prospects.
Yeah.
Any thoughts for them?
Yeah. Well, that's the $1 million question, right? So It's honestly, it's the $1 million question. We don't know what's going to happen. If anybody tells you they do know what's going to happen over the next, especially over the next couple of years, I think they're blowing smoke. I mean, I've been deep in it in terms of the planning for the coming year, and we are still not sure. There is one in terms of business schools and kind of like the role of business schools, and you know, will our industry kind of still exist going forward? I'm actually more optimistic about that even now than I was a little while ago, because what I think is what I'm hearing, at least from all of the advisory people to the school who are business people, is that the kinds of skills that business schools can deliver are still definitely the kinds of skills that businesses are looking for. I think that the online stuff will shake things up a little bit, but that what is becoming increasingly evident, or maybe just reaffirming what people suspected, which is that there's lots of potential in online, but there are real limits to online, and that students do want to be, you know, physically in place and all the rest of it. So I think medium, long term in terms of job prospects, I don't see. No, long term, who knows? In the long term, we're all dead. But in the medium term, I feel quite optimistic. I think what happens, you know, like next year or the year after in terms of the job market really depends on what happens with university budgets, and they seem to be kind of all over the map at the moment. We are hiring in strategy next year at Rotman, just FYI, and I think there will be other schools that are hiring, but it might be a tricky year. It might be a tricky year. I'm not gonna lie. Yeah. So yeah.
So kind of moving a little bit further from PhD, I know we have a lot of PhD students, so we tend to sort of focus on that, but you know, some of us. You know, obviously you've over your career, you've done a lot of service to the profession. You were division chair for BPS when it was still BPS. You've been an AE at SMJ, at management science, at strategy science for the, you know, starting point, and then of course for the special issue. How do you think about sort of service as part of this profession? What's exciting about it? What should people be wary about?
Yeah. I think that, you know, I think that doing some service to the profession, you know, echoing what I said before, it is important for those of us who can. And not everybody's suited to it. You know, I mean, there are some brilliant minds out there who we don't want anywhere near service obligations. but for those of us who can, I think it's important that we do. I mean, the way I look at it is, you know, you got to think about service, the bucket of service in a bucket, right? And you want to really think about what's the size of that bucket, and then within that we have lots and lots of different ways that we can serve. So do it in the way that actually brings you some joy. So for me, that's I have probably done more than my share of service over the years, but it's until recently it's been very kind of research focused. So it's been on journals. It's very much, you know, aligned with the value that I place on, and the benefit, you know, the utility that I get from mentorship. So the SRI stuff, you know, the PhD bootcamp and all of that was really, as I say, kind of my, to an extent, was my baby. So, and I've worked with PhD students from day one. You know, my first year as an assistant professor, Rochelle Sampson, I think I joined Rochelle's dissertation committee, like pretty much in my first year as an assistant prof. And it is, as people say, it's time consuming and all of that, but I was really fortunate to work with great students. Juan Alcázar was a relatively early, I was on his committee as well. So I was very fortunate in that way, but it was also, that's what you know, it's like, if I'm going to do service, I know I don't have to do this, but this is the bit that I want to do, right? So pick and choose. Don't say yes to everything, but don't say no to everything either. Yeah.
And then, I mean, in addition to doing service to the profession, I know you've been involved with what is now SIOE, but used to be ISNI or whatever. And I know Zhao had sent me a question about that. Zhao, do you want to actually ask that question, or?
Sure. Thanks, Joanne. It's been fantastic. So could you? I was just wondering. You've also been very active in SIOE, the Society for Institutional and Organizational Economics, which is the new name. So yeah. Could you share a little bit about that society with the audience, yeah. And especially if and how you think that might be relevant or be of interest to strategy scholars? Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, in some ways I kind of fell into ISNI because it was started by, so like the founding people were kind of North, Williamson, I forget, well, Pablo Spiller was involved and Coase was involved, used to be involved early on too. And I know I'm missing a couple of others, but really it was kind of Williamson that kind of dragged the BPP students into there. And I think what I really like, and it has evolved over the years, right? So it became kind of very institutional. And I think especially with, they've got Bob Gibbons on board, and there's been a real kind of try to shift to bring it more back towards organizational economics or expand it out back into there, right? But one of the things that I really like about that, I think there are a variety of these smaller associations that I think have real value as a community, and that is one where there is kind of a community around that. Actually, there's 2 or 3 different communities embedded within it in some sense. So it's useful as a community of scholars. So like Nanjia, right, who was one of my a student at Rotman, she, I think, has been quite active in ISNI and now CO. And because she does work on kind of non-market strategy, I think, I think she would say that she's found real value in that, and you can get more traction, in some ways get more visibility within a somewhat smaller community. So I think that anybody who has interest in non-market strategy or organizational economics or kind of institutions broadly defined, it's a welcoming and a interesting community of scholars. It's also somewhere, because it has a very broad international and disciplinary footprint, it's a really fun conference to go to and just kind of go to see some really different papers. And it's a lot easier to navigate than something like Academy, where yes, you can find lots of broad ranging and interesting papers at Academy. And, I mean, that's part of the value of Academy too, but there is also some value in these smaller conferences where you get to, you kind of, it's just easier to navigate in some sense. So, yeah. But yeah, I would definitely encourage you to check it out.
So, speaking of community, and I have one more serious question, and I'm gonna, Sabina, before she left, gave me a bunch of what I like to call silly questions, which she calls fun questions. But I'll get to those. Before that, since you were talking about community, and you mentioned this a little bit earlier when we were talking about, Williamson. So, I think for a lot of us, especially I think in that sort of time period, actually for a long period of time, I think a lot of us looked with sort of, let's face it, envy at the BPP program, right? And said, well, I mean, the bad version of this is the BPP mafia, but I'm not going to call it that, right? But just the amazing kind of sense of camaraderie, the amazing sort of collaboration between students, spanning in some sense almost a generation or more than a generation. Mm-hmm. So what's the secret there? Like, how does that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm kind of, in terms of like the Williamson era, I am one of the oldest. I'm kind of like a grandma. But in some ways, the community, the BPP community did predate that. So there was an earlier incarnation of BPP that was more around corporate social responsibility and issues like that. And there was already a fairly tight kind of, a very collegial and mutually supportive student culture at that time. So we in some ways inherited that. And then I think partly because of the strong polls of David Mowry and Oliver Williamson, and to some extent David Teese as well, that meant that the students during my era and beyond, there's always been a fairly a lot of overlapping, you know, kind of interests and intellectual orientation. But I do think that we have, from the early days, really from, you know, like the early 90s when I was there, we've taken institutions seriously. And so I didn't mention, so Ha mentioned at the end in past me breaking my hand on a bottle, opening a bottle for Oliver Williamson. It is true. I was opening a bottle of beer for Oliver Williamson and I broke my hand, but I didn't let on. So nobody knew that I had broken my hand. And I went to the doctors the next day and he's like, yep, it's broken. It's called a boxer's break. It's this bone right here. But that's kind of like but the reason I was opening a bottle of beer for Williamson was because he had this seminar. It was called IDS 270. It was his speaker series. And because of his stature and his eclectic interests, they would, like, you know, bring in people from all different areas. And the PhD students were very involved in it. And so I think that was also kind of, it was part of the community building. We really had good community building within the school. And then from pretty early on, we instituted, you know, what a lot of schools do now is, you know, kind of the annual meetings at the academy where everybody would get together. And then for quite a few years now, we have had a conference once a year that's all BPP alumni, and we go and we present work to each other. It's usually focused more on kind of junior and mid-career, but us old farts still go once in a while. And each year there, the students who are going on the job market get to present. So it's kind of like they're presenting to their network. And I think that obviously helps. That is part of the mafia part of it. You know, it is a network in that respect. So I think it's, you know, it's part formal institutions and it's part a culture that's just gone back a long time. Yeah. And we were a pretty big program. I think it still is reasonably big, but, you know, in my day, we had a couple of years. We were usually like 3 in the program in a year, but there was a couple of bubble years where I think we had one year where there were 7 or 8 students. And me and Emerson Tiller actually took credit for that because they always used to have to enroll, give more offers than they would yield. And that particular year, I think it was one of the first years that Williamson was also doing the PhD admissions. And he persuaded them that even though we only had, I think they had 6 slots, but maybe 4 slots. And he said, you know, our yield's always terrible, so let me make 8 offers. And the administration, by some wacky thing, actually let him make 8 offers. And me and Emerson met with every one of those people who had made offers. It was the year when Rosemary Ham, for instance, now Zadonis, came in. And we apparently persuaded all of them to come. And so we had this bumper year. And I do think critical mass matters, you know, so it helped.
So we do have one other question from Nina. Nina, do you want to ask your question? Just unmute yourself.
Oh, you're muted. Yeah.
Hi, Joanne. Thanks for sharing. I'm a PhD student at London Business School. I just wanted to ask if you could share more about how you decide that you're happy with your paper and when you actually decide to submit it to journals, because you mentioned that you don't tend to send them off until you feel that they're really ready.
Mm-hmm. So I think you have to throw your guts out on the table, right? You have to let people read your paper, let your strongest critics read your paper, present it to your peers, and, you know, yeah, there's no substitute for exposing your ideas, as painful as it can be. And I will say another thing that I've always done and that I think is super useful is I've always been a part of, serendipitously or by generating it myself, being part of a kind of virtual brown bags, or communities of peers. So some of them have been more formal, like the what did we call it? The SRF. Like I was one of the early people in the SRF, where you have a conference of juniors only. And I think the juniors only is really important. You want it to be your peers, where you can throw your guts out on the table. And if I didn't have that, I've also been a part of virtual brown bag groups where we would meet by phone every week, and say there'd be a half a dozen of us, and one of us would be presenting every week. How, weren't you in that for a little while? That virtual brown bag that we had?
Yes, it was very helpful.
Yeah, no, and I think it's great. It's it forces you to just kind of, again, just expose your ideas. There's nothing can beat that, because you can think it's as beautiful as you like, but then somebody reads it and they just don't get it. And I think a lot of problems when people are sending in their first papers or the first round, it's not that they don't have a good idea or even a good study. They just haven't communicated it well enough, because they're down in their own little, rabbit hole. I hope that's helpful.
So I was waiting to see if Nina wanted to say something, but it's fine. Okay, so now to move on to the, so let's start with the simplest one maybe. Outside of work, what do you do for fun? What your favorite hobbies?
I play soccer. Not this year. It's like driving me crazy. You can't play soccer. I love playing soccer. I'm very bad, and I think I'm the oldest woman in my league, just about. But I love it. So yes. So that's the first thing that comes to mind.
And then thinking specifically about reading outside of the work. You have a favorite genre of book, favorite author?
So I think honestly the answer to that is no. I love reading. I love literary fiction. I am a part of a book club. I am part of a book club of people that are really otherwise outside of my social circle. And so again, it's this, I really enjoy reading all kinds of literary fiction, but I also love talking about literary fiction. So I do really enjoy being in a book club. And I have to admit, I am not good at kind of reading, I'm not good at keeping up always with the latest and greatest in news and business books and things like that. I think it's one of my failings. I always feel like I need to do a bunch of homework before I teach a class, because I haven't been reading widely enough since the last time I taught.
I think we all have that feeling. There's just so much, and at this point, not reading the news is probably good for sanity. So, I know right now we're all kind of, the pandemic has basically put most travel on hold. But back when you could travel, what would be your favorite city to visit?
I spent 6 months of a sabbatical in Paris, and
I was going to say, I know what you.
Yeah, that is still like a real highlight. I have to say, I would love to go back to Paris for an extended visit. I like visiting Paris, but I really liked pretending I lived there for 6 months. And I haven't traveled, as widely over the years as I might. As you know, there's tons and tons and tons of opportunity. And, perhaps because I have a couple of kids, and it's always, work-life balance has always been really important to me. It's super easy as an academic to kind of put life off until the next hurdle, I'll do that after I get a job. I'll do that after I get tenure. I'll do that after. And I think you have to live your life. And part of that is that I haven't traveled probably as much. And then I have family, my family's in the UK, my husband's family is in California. So, you know, adding family trips to both those places every year, and there aren't as many opportunities as there might be. So, you know, big confession, I have 3 papers on Japanese business. I have 1 paper on Russia. I have not been to Japan, and I have not been to Russia. So, you know, I'm not proud of that, by the way, but it just is a fact. And it goes back to, you know, clearly I work with co-authors who are embedded in those. I would never dream of writing about a place based on that lack of knowledge if I didn't have ultimate trust in my co-authors' knowledge of the institutions, because institutions matter. But yeah, so I haven't traveled as much as I would like, and it's one of the things that in my post-administrative phase, now that my kids are out of the house, except for COVID, I will travel much more, including particularly to Asia. Yeah.
Okay, well, you know, I know we're rescheduling the SMS Hangzhou conference, so I think I will hold you to that.
Yeah.
You mentioned work-life balance, you know, a couple of minutes ago, and, you know, and I know we have, you know, a number of people on, you know, especially assistant professors and, you know, people with kids, etc. Thoughts about work-life balance, especially for working mothers, for example?
So I've been really, really lucky in that respect. In part, you know, one of the fun facts, I am married to a professional juggler. And the professional jugglers, it turns out, have quite different schedules than profs. And so that's definitely helped. I think it's really hard when you have two working parents with very similar kind of schedules. It definitely makes things more tricky. So I think that is one thing that's just a fact, you know. I think in terms of tips or advice, I think a couple of things is, you know, one of the beauties of our job is that we do have a lot of flexibility, and sometimes we don't, you know, and you can work hard and do well and still take advantage of that flexibility. And sometimes I think people feel like they shouldn't, and I strongly encourage you to do that, you know. And the other thing is, just my mantra when the kids were small was outsource everything but the kids, right? So throw money at it to don't outsource the kids, or no more than you're comfortable with. I'm not judging, but it was really important to me to be able to have maximum kid time. So, but everything else, you know, anything else that I could outsource, I would. Yeah.
And Samina asked me to ask this, so it's blame her. So the professional juggling thing, I think, you know, we all think of ourselves as professional jugglers, but apparently he's actually a professional juggler. Is he still a professional juggler? Like, what is that like?
Not during COVID.
I guess that's true.
This year's pretty rough on professional jugglers. I will say that. But yes, but other than that, yes, he definitely is still doing that. And I should also just give him a shout out. He paid my way through grad school, professional juggling too. So it's like I owe him from the very beginning. So yeah, one of the things that people used to say, you know, like, how are your kids ever going to rebel when you have a mother who's a business professor and a father who's a juggler? You know, how the heck do you rebel against that? And I always say one of the things that we have in common is we both started working when we were teenagers, and so we've both been kind of pretty, you know, like independent and self-sufficient since an early age. So we may have 40-year-olds living at home before, you know, that's how they'll rebel.
Favorite dessert?
My friend just made my favorite dessert the other night. They made a rhubarb pavlova. I'm not particularly a dessert person, but Oh my goodness, it was to die for.
Okay then. Trying to imagine what that tastes like. Oh,
it's beautiful. It's custard. It's very British. It's very like close to a Brit's heart. It's got custard. It's got meringue.
yeah, which is what worries me. But
what's not to love?
So, Joanne, I think that's pretty much all I have. I just want to, again, on behalf of the division, on behalf of the Stronger Together team, I really, really want to thank you. I'm going to hand it over to Ha, but just thank you so much for doing this. It's always a pleasure. It's been wonderful. Ha, you want to?
Yeah, no, I guess this is where I applaud for everyone. And I want to thank you so much for your time. And I think a lot of this, I think I'm going to come back to your advice. So I'm going to be rewatching the video. And thank you so much for sharing your energy and passion with us. It was a wonderful conversation.
Thank you so much, everybody, for sticking around. It's not often I get to talk about myself for a couple hours. It's like, so I really, it's been super fun. And thank you, Asim, and thank you, Ha, and thank you, everybody. Thank you, Samina. Thank you, everybody, for just coming, and it's fantastic.
Okay, with that, thank you, everyone, and see you on YouTube.
Okay. All right, bye-bye.
Have a great day, bye.